Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, people. How are you? Great. Oh, come on now. Afternoon. How are you all doing tonight? All right. Woo! Excellent, excellent. My name is Tim McCarthy. I'm a faculty member here at Hugsy, and I'm the faculty chair of the inaugural B.R.A.V.E. Institute, which is a new professional education program here at Hugsy that launched this week. Yes. And we are co-hosting this wonderful Askwith Education Forum, which is the last one of the Askwith Forums this spring. And I'll be the moderator of tonight's conversation on brave leadership and the future of American education. Small topic for us. But before I introduce the panel, I wanted to acknowledge a very special guest. There are many special guests in the audience today, but one in particular, Patricia Askwith Kenner, who is in the front row here. And Patty is the granddaughter of Herbert Askwith. Herbert Askwith, A.B., 1907, was a New York City public relations consultant, a writer, and a publishing executive. The Askwith Forums were established in 1998 by his children and grandchildren in his honor. One of the many wonderful things about the Askwith Forums, which I've been coming to for as long as they've been in existence, I was an elementary school child, of course, when I came to the first ones, is that they provide us an opportunity, and one of the things that we can do in universities, an opportunity to bring people together across different life experiences and perspectives, belief systems, and political ideas to grapple with the most critical and challenging issues of our time in critical ways. And so this is an opportunity for us, and this will be a conversation where we'll try to do that, to untangle some of the messy complexities of the world in which we live. And particularly, and I don't need to underscore this any more forcefully, at this particular moment in our nation's history and in the history of our world, the opportunity to listen, to learn, and to struggle together for a better world is more important than it's ever been before. And so if I'll use the parlance that we like to use here, which we can still say, our community is so grateful for this safe and brave space that your family has given us. Now, I'm a historian, and I've taught in this room for almost a decade, and I've never known the story of the flag. So I'm going to share I'm a historian of the United States, and so that's one of the lenses I bring to this. And I should mention that this rare 46-star U.S. flag in the wall right here, which is right next to the dean's office outside here, was a gift from Patty in honor of her grandparents, Herbert and Margaret Long Askwith, A.B. 1908. And it was in use during the years that he was at Harvard College. Only those 2 years.
I found it at an antique show.
You did. Well, look at that.
And it was only the 2 years that they were here.
I love it. A living history legend and lesson here in the front row. So, Patty, let me just and call everyone here again to welcome you back, and to just thank you for everything your family's done. And now I'm going to introduce very succinctly three people who I could talk about each of them all night if I wanted to. And I want to, but I'm not going to because we have so much to get to. My furthest left, chair-wise, is... Monique and I were in grad school together in the 90s, so we're going to fight about who's left or left. Anyway, Monique Kuvsin is the president and CEO of G4GC, and we'll hear more about your work as we go along. In the center of my three guests here is, of course, Miguel Cardona, the 12th U.S. Secretary of Education. And then to my immediate left is Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation of Teachers. Let's give them a warm welcome, and welcome back to Hugsy. So we're going to have a conversation for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And there are index cards that we're going to ask you to write your questions on. And so please be doing that as we go through here. We won't obviously get to all the questions, but we'll get to hopefully 3 or 4. And I will go through them towards the end of our time together. But first, I'm going to ask them one opening question, and they're all going to sort of give me a response to that. And then I'm going to do a deeper dive into, for each of them, a set of questions that I put together that I think their particular lens and experience and perspective will help to illuminate. And then I'll ask another big question for all of them, and then we'll go to the Q&A. So the first question, and I'd like to invite Monique to answer first, and then Miguel, and then Randy. It's no secret to anyone in this room or anyone who's paying attention that our entire educational ecosystem in the United States is under assault in real and even, and this is not a word that I use often as a historian, unprecedented ways in this moment in history. And so if you could talk a little bit from your perspectives, how did we get here? And what are the most pressing challenges, the most clear and present dangers of this current crisis facing the field of education?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here and the opportunity to sort of speak first on this issue. It's not lost on me where we are, and it's not lost on me what I do for a living, being, this is mighty close, and it may get a little loud because I can talk loudly, but, but we'll work with it. I want to start by answering that question with the words of Langston Hughes. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I've been saying in this moment is that it's time for us to take notes from the ancestors. That when we think about where we are now, there's an opportunity. There is often this tendency for folks to say this is unprecedented, as you just did, and we kind of lean into that with a degree of hopelessness. But I also think that this is an invitation for us to then lean into the things that our ancestors taught us about what we need to know about moments that are unprecedented and how we respond to them. So one of the things that Langston Hughes wrote was Black Misery, and it goes, "Misery is turning on the radio and learning that the neighborhood you live in is a slum, and you always thought it was home." The invitation and how we got here is to acknowledge that for many decades, we've been building on structures and systems that almost relied on inequity to survive. That there was a complacency with the building anti-intellectualism that was sweeping through our nation and challenging us, but we were not responding, right? Challenging us to think critically about structures that don't work, challenging us to think about the opportunities for there to be an inclusive, engaging society that reflects, that maps the margins. There's been a lot of talk over the years about Kimberly Crenshaw's framework around intersectionality without a deep interrogation of what that means. And what we were doing was just sort of naming identities and walking through and fighting about those things rather than really doing a deep dive on how those identities intersect with institutions or people that drive policy or that create policy that impact communities that are vulnerable to the deepest forms of harm in our society. I have spent many, many years looking at those communities, right, mapping the margins per, what I consider Crenshaw's mandate, right? Yeah. Really thinking about then what it means to understand not just how people get there, but why these systems are thriving, right? Why these systems are not serving folks who need it, and what we can do to be disruptive in those moments. The swell of anti-intellectualism was fully supported by anti-Blackness, anti-immigration policy, misogyny, all the violence, structural, emotional, spiritual, intellectual violence that so many communities were living with, that it started to erode what was already a very vulnerable system of learning. And learning is fundamentally my invitation to the world has been for us to think about schools and learning as an opportunity for healing and an opportunity for us to express the most raw and purest forms of love with our young people. Instead, we've made it a political project. Yeah. And so because it was not treated as a love project, but rather a political project, what we got was a political project. And what we got was an effort to dismantle the very things that are at the center, not just of our society, but of our families, of our ability to be human and express it with our youngest, most vulnerable folks. So from my vantage point, part of what we're dealing with is the inability for us to understand that those 50 million culturally, linguistically, sexually, and gender diverse young people who we're serving in our public schools and more in our private, independent, parochial, et cetera schools, is that we are dealing with young people who are just trying to learn, and we are interfering with that process with our politics.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Great to be here. Great to share the stage with the panelists here. And thank all of you. I'm looking around the room. I see folks from 20 years ago that I knew, folks that I've known recently. And I just want to say that despite the challenge that we're in, I feel confident about tomorrow because of the people in this room.
Yeah.
I really do. I know. We've been through storms before. Remember where we were 5 years ago? Remember we couldn't, what are we going to do? There's no playbook for that. There's no playbook for this, but we got this. We did it before, we're going to do it again. So I'm going to take, and I appreciate her response. It was a really good kind of framework to for me to dive into how I think we got here specifically. And then I'll mention what I think the damages are, what's going to happen. There was a very deliberate strategy to create fear and division in this country through the creation of a boogeyman a year. 2020 was masks. Or 21 when I came in, it was quiet before. 21 when I came in, it was masks. 22, it was CRT, which I call culturally relevant teaching, Gloria Ladson Billings, but we're not going to go there. CRT was 22. Transgender fears was 23. And 24, I mean, you name it, banned books, you could go through a list of things. Indoctrination. So there was a strategy to create division in public education. And then through the back door, we're going to talk about scholarships for kids. Who doesn't want scholarships for kids, right? Vouchers was the alternative. There's a deliberate attempt to destroy public education happening under our noses.
That's right.
So I could talk at the 50,000-foot view and say, if you remove OCR, Office for Civil Rights, if you take away the regulatory support and accountability, to quote Richard Elmore, one of Harvard's, if you take that away and there's no oversight of where the dollars are going, basically we can't require that all students' needs be met. Okay? So let's dismantle the Department of Education to further dismantle public education, to privatize and monetize a public good. Something that levels the playing field, something that because of public education, I'm able to sit here talking at Harvard. I had only what my local neighborhood public school provided. So that's the macro level, the micro level. I was in a district in Ohio last year, and I had a superintendent come up to me and say, I had to give $12 million out of my budget to vouchers. And the new law passed, I had to give $12 million, devastated my public schools.
That's right.
And the principal, who was standing right next to her, came up to me and she said, and you know what? After October 1st, when the state got their counts for their funding distribution, the following week we had a line of students with disabilities lined up to come back into our school because the other places said, the public school will handle you better. Right. But they didn't send the money back. That's happening in all of our districts across the country. And I know some of my colleagues, my friends here in Connecticut are like, that'll never happen here. Let's not take our eyes off what's happening and how it's creeping. So that, in my opinion, is the greatest risk that we have in this next chapter that we have to guard against. But as I said before, I think public education is the great equalizer. And at the end of the day, whether I'm secretary or the current secretary or the previous secretary, when your doors close, you know what to do for students and you know how to lead for students. And I think the challenge right now is really at your level to make sure you protect students despite what's happening and what's coming your way.
Thank you. Thank you. Randy.
It's great going last because I can say ditto, ditto. But I want to kind of go deeper into what Monique and the secretary said. I've just spent a year basically interrogating this question, and tomorrow the publisher will announce a book that's going to come out in September that I wrote about this question that's called Why Fascists Fear Teachers. And so it will, and it's just, but so I agree with everything that Monique and Miguel just said, and I want to go deeper to what Monique said, which is, there is, our African American communities have been through this before. Mm-hmm. Jim Crow in the South, disappearing people, lynching, slavery. What has happened is white folks haven't been through this in this kind of way before. And I think, just like Monique said, there's a lot to learn. I've been spending a bunch of time reading and how we create not just a resistance, but a resilience and a joy and a sense of community. And one of the books that I've read several times, and for any of my members who are here, have heard me talk about, is King's last book, Chaos versus Community. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because I think it does point to solutions in terms of community and the beloved community. And as I said, many of my members who are here have heard me talk about that because we can't just talk about the problem, we have to talk about the solution. But the second piece is this, and then I'll get to the third piece. I kept wondering, which is why I wrote this book, what is this fear of knowledge? Yeah. What is this fear of critical thinking? Because it's not only the fear of the other, but it's a fear of ourselves. Like, why would you fear our kids becoming critical thinkers? That's right. Why would you fear our kids wanting a welcoming and safe environment? Why would you fear diversity in a country that is about diversity? Why? That has been the question. Mm-hmm. As I get, vilified by people like Christopher Rufo and others all the time, that's the question that I've been asking myself. And the third thing is this. I mean, I think the answer is obvious, which is what happens in all authoritarian governance systems. But the third is this. The American project of education that essentially started with Brown versus Board of Education is completely dissonant and different than everywhere else in the world, which is we actually believe, this room, we actually believe in all children. And so part of what we have to do, and we never get it fully right because we're talking about all children. And even if we got it fully right for all children that moment, then what about the next year? The next year. And so that is our aspiration, and that is a fantastic aspiration. And that was the aspiration of the war on poverty. And that was the reason for the Department of Education. So our focus has to be how we, at this moment, not only save education, but strengthen it and create in this liminal space the opportunity for people to see that we are about all kids. So it is both the fighting the harm that is happening right now, but also at the same time, as hard as it is, creating, and that's why I go back to where I started, and thinking about struggle in the South and struggle in the Civil War. Why did slave owners, why was it prohibited for slaves to read?
That's right.
So I'm honored to be here because we have this amazing opportunity to fight fascism, but also to fight for opportunity for all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for that powerful opening. It's so interesting that you said, one of your responses to this moment is to read. I mean, I've been going back, rereading things, the ancestors and other things, and I find myself reading a lot about the Civil War Reconstruction and the fall of Reconstruction.
Yes.
I've gone back to the middle of the 20th century with all the stuff that's going on there. In the late 60s and 70s, these places that I'm returning to refresh the knowledge that I had and gain new knowledge. And one thing that I've actually been trying to figure out is the history of the Department of Education. Actually, it's one of the things that I've been sort of thinking about, because when the calls for the abolition of the new calls for the abolition of the Department of Education came, I was sort of like, let me figure out what this thing is, when it started, how it's evolved over time, and so forth. And then I was struck to realize, I mean, I knew that it was that Jimmy Carter created the Department of Education in 1979. What I did not know was the fervor with which Ronald Reagan called for the abolition of the Department of Education the year after it was created during the campaign of 1980. And so the DOE has been a constant source of controversy, a target of critique, and even calls for abolition since its very founding, right down to the present situation. And the present situation is very confusing, because on the one hand, you have like days where it's like, let's abolish the Department of Education. And then other days it's like, no, let's weaponize it to destroy Harvard. And so it's like, for instance, and it's like, so what is it? Are we abolitionists, or are we going to war with it? You can't do both. Maybe you can. I guess you can. But there are competing narratives right now out there about the DOE, among other things, swirling myths, contested truths, that include that the federal Department of Education, which you led, is too woke or it's useless, that American education is really a state and local matter, so it doesn't matter anyway. And so since you have been the Secretary of Education and led that department, can you shed some light on this? Why is the DOE important? And what are or should be its core roles and responsibilities in a democracy?
I'm glad you brought up the irony. Another
irony is one word for it.
Another ironic fact is one of my last events as Secretary of Education was the funeral of President Jimmy Carter.
Right.
And I was maybe 8 rows behind the row of presidents, and I just thought to myself, we could really be at a crossroads here. Yeah. It was just really symbolic of what's happening. The person who brought it in is being laid to rest, and the person who wants to abolish it is chirping in the front row. So, look, it's a civil rights agency.
That's right.
The Office for Civil Rights protects protected classes to ensure that they get education guaranteed. One of the things that I took pride in when serving as Secretary of Education is ensuring that we protected the civil rights of all students, regardless of what state they were from. Mm-hmm. Some of the most visible cases that we had going during the 4 years I was Secretary was against Los Angeles and against Michigan. To protect the rights of students with disabilities. And some of those cases went a long time, and I threatened to take money away from those blue cities and states. It's a civil rights agency. And, federal funding for education is about 9%. It's about 9%, not a lot, 91%. And, I laugh when I hear, oh, it's a state, let's bring it back to the states. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. I was a commissioner of education.
Right.
I was a district leader. I was a school principal. I was a teacher. In each of those roles, I had more say in the curriculum than I did as secretary.
Yeah.
And I reminded the country of that when I was in office. I did that because I knew I didn't want Betsy DeVos doing curriculum, nor do I want Linda McMahon doing curriculum. So I knew my role. So it is a state and local. Now, the 9% is a very important 9%. IDEA, Title I, Title III, right? Rural education. We have 26 million students right now that benefit from Title I dollars. 7 million students that have IEPs. 9 million students in rural America. What's going to happen is, because the Civil Rights Office is being eroded, because the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education is being eroded, 40% of the people are gone already. It's going to be a free-for-all. The variance between states is going to be enormous. And I'm going to be very honest, the red states are going to suffer more because they rely on those safeguards. The rural students are not going to have options to go to schools because those voucher programs are not going to be a school popping up down the street. So the students furthest from opportunity are going to be impacted the most and the quickest as a result of what happened in the last 3 months. Even if it were to stop today, the impact is going to be felt there, not to mention the 17 million students who look for federal aid in the form of Pell Grants to go to college. Again, leveling the playing field. So it was created as a civil rights agency, but it functions to ensure that the dollars that Congress appoints to the states gets there and are used for their intended purpose. And a lot of folks say, oh, it's accountability. You know, there were 4,000 employees there. It's not enough to monitor, 5,000 districts. But what it did do is provide the support. 2021 was the first time ever in the Department of Education where mental health guidance went out, ever. The role of the department was a service agency under my watch. We made sure we provided support, not mandates or, we provided supports to districts and states that wanted to use their federal dollars. So think about what's happening now. I like to be pragmatic here. So we get rid of OESE. They oversee the grants and making sure the money goes. Now 50 states have to take their Title I dollars and create a department to distribute that money.
Right.
Where do you think that's coming from?
That's right.
Right? From the allotment that is intended for students. The same thing with IDEA. The same thing, go down the line. So it was a small department. We provided 9% of the funding, but the funding went to the students that needed it the most.
Yeah.
So, as I said before, in those communities that were, believed that this was going to help them, those are the ones that are going to be hurt the most.
Yeah. I was smiling when you were talking about the different perspectives you bring to this, because sometimes the kids talk about levels when something's deep. They're like, levels. And I realized, like you're like Secretary of Education, and then like superintendent in Connecticut, and then a district leader, and then a teacher, and I'm like, you are levels.
Yeah.
Like, you're like all the levels. That was deep. Randy, I wanted to ask you a question that relates obviously to your longstanding and impressive work as the president of the American Federation of Teachers, which is, I learned when we had our prep call for this panel, the fastest growing union in the United States right now. I am, as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm the son and grandson of public school teachers who are all union people. In fact, I learned as an elementary school student what
And
it
your
meant.
father,
My father.
and I went to the same high
Same
school.
high school. And
And your grandmother
my grandmother taught
at that high school.
Yeah. My grandmother retired. The new high school was Clarkstown South. You and my dad went to Clarkstown North.
Of course.
Of course. And the street to the new high school, Clarkstown South, as they were building it, was named McCarthy Way in honor of my grandmother.
That's awesome.
And I just learned that about our connection. So we're family up here. So anyway, and I first learned not to cross a picket line from my parents because they were teacher union people back in the day. So you've been at this work a long time, and I've admired it for a long time because I was raised by it. Why do teachers still need unions? And how have teachers' experiences, the need for and the function of unions changed as education itself and schools themselves have changed over the last generation? And then another question I want to layer into that is,
Do we have 5 hours?
I know.
I think this is a class.
I know, we're trying to do, well, we're going to invite you back. What do we need to do to get this country to value teachers morally and materially the way that they have always deserved to be valued?
So let me take the first 2 questions. And I think it also, something that my wife teaches me a lot, she's a rabbi, is to try to reject the binary. Because I do think the world and all of us, not just at Harvard, it's pretty complicated. And there's not just layers, but there's complications and complexities on layers. So, I mean, the last question, in some ways I can answer it easily. And it's also hard, which is the easy answer is we are a disproportionately female profession. And there's not, you know, and we're still dealing with, in some ways, we're now dealing with things in a very fundamentally different ways about the role of the sexes in the world. Yeah. And how the disproportionately female aspect of it made it very easy not to pay it appropriately. Now the question is, if teaching was paid appropriately, given that it is a public service, one of the few public services in the United States, would people actually pay the taxes on it in that kind of way? I mean, that's another question. That's why I'm saying, let's reject some of the binary here, because that's the easy answer to why. And thank God, sorry to invoke God, but thank God, virtually everyone who teaches, from the earliest moments through college, the through line is we want to make a difference in the lives of people. And that is an intrinsic piece to anyone who teaches. And it is lovely and wonderful and amazing, and it is what makes me cry every time I'm in a classroom, because you watch that and you see that, and you see that work, and that's what should be honored all the time. And my anger is that that kind of way is not honored, and it's easily exploited. So what's interesting about your first two questions is that in all, like, if you look at the labor movement over the course of, let's just say, the last 100 years, or the last, since, let's just say since the 30s, because the labor movement was ascendant,
The Wagner Act.
and then the depression of the 20s kind of killed it, and then it started being ascendant again in the 30s with FDR and with the strikes and auto. Sorry, I went to the Cornell School of Labor Relations, so this was implanted in me. So, but if you think about from the 30s, the 1930s to the 2020s, you saw in the 60s, the 50s, 60s, 70s, a real demise of the labor movement. And remember the issue around auto. Why am I paying for $2,000 of this car? Is because I am paying for the pensions of auto workers. I heard that so often in the 80s and the 90s. And because we, ended up in America basically doing health and pension through employment as opposed to in the other Western democracies. So so the deferred compensation of people were being paid for in the car, but that deferred compensation was deferred compensation. So you saw and I start there because that is the root. If you think about the Midwest, you think about Lowell, you think about Lawrence, all of these places that used to have great manufacturing, the jobs, were tough, but great manufacturing places, all of a sudden they were no longer manufacturing areas. The same is true in the Midwest in the 70s, in the 80s. And so all of a sudden the private sector union movement that actually built the public sector movement was gone. And there was a lot of anger because a lot of people basically not only lost their jobs, but lost everything. Meanwhile, the public sector labor movement was ascendant. And why did teachers want unions? And why are teachers now the most densely unionized profession in the country? About 70%. And that's part of the reason why unions are attacked and we're attacked so much is because we understood we didn't have power individually. We're not Elon Musk, we're not a billionaire. Far from it. So if you don't have power individually, you only have power through a collective and then through a union contract. And that's why people then understood that the only way to create that community, to create power, was to actually have a union. And so that's why, unions are being smashed all the time. Now, let me say one more thing. Do we get everything right? No, not at all. Take tenure, K-12. Tenure should not be an excuse not to manage, nor should it be presumed a job for life. And part of what we didn't do as unionists was we didn't take our responsibilities, as I'm looking at Susan Moore Johnson, we've had this conversation, we didn't take our responsibilities seriously as unions to actually do the work we had to do, even if a member or two would scream at us. And that's part of the, again, and I'll end here, rejecting the binary. You need to have power in this country. A disproportionately female workforce should have some power. It shouldn't just be Elon Musk who has power in the world. But we have to use that power in a way that our first priority is the kids we teach.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Thank you. I love what's coming up, this sort of arc where we're building on education as a civil rights issue, education as a labor issue, and then, of course, Monique, I'm coming to you because you've spent so much of your career and your life talking about education as a justice issue. You've been, for many, many years now, one of the nation's most tenacious and courageous advocates for educational equity, liberation, and justice, for youth of color in particular, and particularly for Black girls and femmes. I've seen this for over 30 years. When we were graduate students at Columbia, I helped to staff your first conference that you planned 30 years ago in Harlem, where you organized the historic convening of the Crisis of Black Youth. I remember that. I still have the program.
Wow.
I still have the program.
We used to hand draw things back then.
You did. Your art is on the cover of that. I have that in my folder. Anyway, we go way back. Your books Push Out and Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues have been field defining, and your TED Talk, of course, has gotten 2 million views, about 150,000 million more than mine, and then translated into 20 languages. I'm wondering, because you mentioned Kimberly Crenshaw, but you are part of the cohort of Black women scholars who have really changed and transformed the way that we think about the structural and intersectional dimensions of race and gender and of violence in schools in particular, and your work offers that, and so much of that has changed the way that we think about this and what we do about this. And yet, right now, we have this moment where there's this fierce backlash on the one hand about people who are really coming after this as the kind of wokeness. And then there's people who are, what Martin Luther King would talk about, this sort of, the white liberals or the folks who are retreating from things. They're not quite the backlash, but they're certainly complicit in the backlash, in my opinion. We've talked about this. So how do you continue to make the case that you've been making for 30 years in the context of progress on the one hand, but then the fierce backlash and the retreat that you're seeing in education? And I'm wondering, you have a particularly interesting intersectional view yourself, or interconnected view, because you're someone who's an academic researcher, you're a policy advocate, you've been an educator and a teacher, you're a creative artist, a graphic novelist, and a philanthropist, right? There aren't a lot of people that I know who do all of that.
And a mom.
And well, of course. And
Her daughter graduates this
from
2
Spelman
days.
College tomorrow. Monique and Dr. Coomson is going to exit stage left at 6 o'clock
Literally.
to get in a car to go to the airport so that your brilliant daughter, my niece, is going to graduate from Spelman tomorrow, a year early.
Wow.
But so you've done it all, and so bring all those lenses to this, and how do you deal with the progress, but also the backlash and retreat in this moment?
I'm going to start by saying that I learned early on that you have to bring your full self to your inquiry. My full self, we contain multitudes, right? It required me to be a whole person and to think about all the different ways that I can make a contribution. A lot of times these issues, and for a very long time, my family didn't understand what I did, right? Some of us first-gen folks, they're like, I don't know what you do, right? But
That's cute.
yeah, sounds good, right? You work for the government, and it was, for me, deeply important to really think about not just framing issues theoretically, which I do and push out in other projects where I talk about the policies, practices, conditions, and the prevailing consciousness that inform how we understand our young people and the kind of institutions we build to support or undermine their well-being, but also thinking about how else we tell stories, how else we bring this multiple ways of knowing, right, that inform how we move in society. The things that are happening and the ways that I have decided to enter the conversation have largely been informed by lived experience, as you mentioned, but also really largely informed by a deep, deep desire to make real the call to action that Martin Luther King gave us in the demands of justice, which were to see justice as an active engagement, not just as this sort of idea, right? To think about how we use power to enact justice. And he actually offered that, power at its best is, love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting what stands against love. That's right. And so when we think about the use of our power to stand against love, it takes it from being a very big issue, like Monique works on racial justice issues, gender justice issues, blah, blah, blah issues, to really thinking about what is within my sphere of influence. What do I control, right? So you would think, and all these levels that we've operated in this conversation about education, education's intersections with other issues, it's often, sort of us thinking about not just what we're doing in the classroom, but it's like, how do I control what happens right here with this young person in front of me, with these people in front of me that can move our understanding away from some of the co-opted language and away from some of the intentional efforts to distort definitions, to undermine progress, and to really think about how we build new language, new engagements, new practices that make us all well and see each other. The thing that aggravates me the most, that really gets on my very last nerve, is the way that people have weaponized this word woke. It's like, is anybody paying attention? Sometimes I'm sitting here like, we are really saying that to be aware is a problem? And people let it go? Are we really saying that equity is something we should avoid in the United States of America in 2025 with this population of people that are here? Very clear. That's why I say it's not unprecedented. Because it is important to think back to when were these times. Yes, it was around enslaved individuals. It was also around colonization of indigenous folks. It was also around the suppression of the vote for women. It was around the complications around women's suffrage movements and the building of Black women's movements. I locate my work in Black girls largely, and girls and femmes of color, because therein lies the greatest opportunity for us to understand what is possible. I have long said that young people of color have the clearest vision to what is possible, because they're so excluded from all the things that they can recognize what is missing. And so when we actively engage them in participatory ways in the construction of new opportunities, new institutions, new ways of learning, new articulations of wisdom, that's when we start to move us away from some of the old language and start to understand that these things are not only precedented, but are weak if we actively create new space and engagements and relationships that allow us to do something different. This to me was not just theory, it was practice. So part of, when I wrote Push Out, a lot of people don't know this, I wrote Push Out and people were like, oh, that helps us understand what was happening. Right. I took Push Out and I made a school.
That's right.
I partnered with the public school system, and we built a school in the Bay Area that took girls who had been pushed out of school to respond to the specific issues that were at play. Because it's not helpful for us only to live in the land of articulating problems. What is helpful is when we design something that allows us to articulate what can happen if we use our imaginations, right?
Exactly right.
We took suspensions off the table. We took expulsions off the table. What are you going to do with girls who have already been pushed out, right? And it invited us to think about how we build relationships with young people. And through that work is where I came up with this understanding. I came to this understanding about schools needing to be locations for healing so that they become locations for learning. This nation is afraid to heal.
Oh, yes.
This nation is very keen on treatment, on erasure, on pretending, but we don't heal. But when we think about institutions as healing agents, and we think about the people who work and breathe and learn or are trying to learn in these institutions as active participants in this healing process, then we're asking different sets of questions that allow our brains to feel safe, allow our bodies to feel safe enough to actually then take in the information that we want to transfer. And so the practice around the work that was happening with what was perceived at the time as a niche population of girls who have been impacted by the criminal legal system or the juvenile court system actually has informed a deep understanding and way of inviting us into new right relationship, arguably, between young people and their learning institutions.
Can you say a word? Yes. I'm going to ask one final question I would like each of you to respond to, but could you just say a word about the role that philanthropy can play in this? Because philanthropy is another actor and another stakeholder and is more important than ever right now, given what's happening to our public institutions and in government.
Yeah, philanthropy is a complicated sector.
Yeah.
And the organization I lead is G4GC. We're a philanthropic intermediary that resources organizations and movements that center the wisdom and well-being of girls and gender-expansive youth of color. That is a mouthful, and it also means that we have the majority of young people who are in our public schools, right? We're dealing with young people of color largely across the gender spectrum. And the institutions that work, that center their well-being and that work with them very closely. Philanthropy can shift and guide a lot of things, but I noticed that philanthropy does some things really well and philanthropy does not do some things really well. Philanthropy, when it is brave, and philanthropy, when it is in alignment with the practices and callings of the field, can be a deep, loving institution and sector. It can be in relationship with organizations and institutions that lean into their wisdoms and into their best practices. It can mean writing multi-year general ops support grants. It can mean a lot of other types of things that we know to be super helpful when you're trying to get work done in the community. And philanthropy can also be a place where people feel that individuals have so much power in deciding what is important that it drives a conversation or can halt a conversation. And so there is a lot of advocacy within the sector of philanthropy to try to get folks to understand that you have to be, in the same way that we sort of elevate participatory structures in research or participatory practices in other domains, that it's important to also have these practices in philanthropy. A handful of us are actively doing that. The handful of us that are actively doing that tend to be intermediaries. And so it is a really important thing just in terms of understanding the structure of philanthropy to recognize all the different ways in which people engage in philanthropic practices. But also, I'll say this, while there may be folks who are high net worth who can have a lot of power, I think the effort for all of us who are in relationship with those individuals is to get them to understand that they should be in relationship, not just with the intermediaries, but also with the institutions that are doing direct work with young people so that those young people also have access to that kind of information. The best, most amazing practices that I have seen have, some been that my team has built around co-constructing actual decision-making processes that allow for funds to move out. But in from my vantage point, philanthropy is about moving resources, not holding resources, not giving 5%, not working from an endowment to hold on to the money over here, when there is crisis over there. The work that we have done, and the first thing I did when I came into this position in philanthropy was to move like Black women move, and that was to make sure our people were good. It was to say, okay, these people, this group, that group, they need funding. They need it now. G4GC was launched in April of 2020. We were in the throes of the pandemic.
Wow.
And so it was very clear to me what was the call, and I was getting texts from the community.
Right.
But it was very clear to me what the call was. And I wanted to be in a place where I could demonstrate that it's okay to move that way, that it's okay to say, we have this body of resources, we can move them out urgently, we can move them out in co-construction with the impacted population of young folks to move the money where they think we should go, not where we think we should go. But there's a lot of work to do in philanthropy to get folks to be in alignment with that.
Yeah.
So again, it boils down to where your sphere of influence is and the conversations that you can have to get folks to understand that we need to just be operating not in silos, but together in this moment.
Yeah. So to any philanthropist out there or aspiring philanthropist, be brave and be loving and be swift with your redistribution. Back to the scheduled program. I'm going to ask for some cards for the questions for the Q&A, but I'm going to ask our guests one final question, which I'd ask all of you to offer up a response to, and then we'll go to the Q&A. This week, in addition, it's the end of the semester here, but we are launching in the programs for professional education this inaugural B.R.A.V.E. Institute, which I'm chairing as a faculty member for the first time. And B.R.A.V.E. is a values-centered leadership and communications lab designed to equip emerging and established education leaders with the tools and skills they need and the space they need to communicate more courageously and lead with integrity. And it has led to a wonderful 2 days so far, 2 more days. This is our kind of midpoint in the Institute. We've had a lot of really wonderful and rich discussions and debates about what it means to be brave as educators in this moment. And it's also led us to contemplate how we might actually radically rethink and reimagine. We're using those words a lot in our conversations in a time of deep disruption and clear crisis. And so there are a lot of people here from the B.R.A.V.E. Institute and other superintendents here from Connecticut that you're here with, Mr. Secretary. And we have students in the room. We're about to go out into the world to do this work. And given that we have so many educators gathered here, what brave leadership do you each believe is necessary in this time to meet this moment, to achieve the kind of country and the kind of world that you all imagine and work for every day? Randy, you first, and then Miguel, and then Monique.
So you can be very trite at these moments when you're asked that question and you want, the audience's questions as well. So I don't really want to be trite, but I really don't want to speak for a long time, which is you have to really think about us and we, not about I. And how the best thing my students ever said to me when I was a teacher at Clara Barton High School in Brooklyn, New York, was they would say to me, they would take my whole name as one syllable, which I could never quite do, but I loved hearing them do it. And they would say, you walk your walk. And this notion of being part of the community and understanding that you have to, as a leader, listen, and you have to, as a leader, people have to feel that authenticity, and they have to feel that you are part of them and part of the community is really important. Having said that, you also have to, and I'll end with this, I have been trying to push people to be on the streets and to see their courage, not their fear. Yeah. And so this notion of how do you help, that's where the leadership comes in, because people have to see you being willing to do that. They have to see you being willing to be vilified. They have to see you being willing to take it on behalf of others. They have to see that, because we have to create a way that people are not fearful and they don't feel alone. So there's a lot of, and the last thing I would say is you have to communicate in a way that people, that lived experience that Monique talked about. So, you know, it's a moment that's really different. I think that's different than most in modern history. I don't think it's similar, but I think that we are called to be part of community and to actually lead community to be our courageous selves and to do that work.
Thank you.
I'll be brief also because I want to make sure you get on your plane and I want to hear the questions from the audience. But I'll say, we're all leaders and this is the best time to lead. This is the best time to lead. You're needed most now. Leadership today looks different than it did 5 years ago. We are all of us, everyone in this room, are on a continuum, where one extreme is protecting the status quo, and I call those people status quoitions. The other extreme are kamikazes, where you die and you go away with your cause. Think about the issues that matter to you, and think about where you are on that continuum. You have to look in the mirror every day. You have to feel comfortable with who you are as a leader. The leadership challenge in 2025 is to find your spot on that continuum and push a little bit more, not to the point where they replace you with someone else the next day because they need you. Find new strategies. If you used 5 years ago strategies, it's not going to work today. A lot of you across the country, I know what some of you are going back to your districts and you have to face your board. I know what you're up against. Welcome to leadership in 2025. How blessed are you that you have a position to be in leadership? If you don't like it, get out.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need critical friends, and sometimes we need reminders. For me, it's this good trouble bracelet that I was given by a student from Hartford, Connecticut, when I was secretary. But look, I'll close with this. This is the best time to lead. They need you now. Our country's in crisis. Our public education system's in crisis. Kids that look like us here, they need leaders to stand up and say, no, we got you. And in the words of the late, great Congressman Lewis, if not us, who? And if not now, when? Lead with courage, lead with passion, and remember why you signed up to do what you're doing. Thank you.
Monique.
Yes, Ashe, we were called to be here and ready and prepared for such a time as this. Education is a critical protective factor against contact with the juvenile court or criminal legal system. Education is a freedom project. Education is freedom work. And my invitation to all of you is, and what inspires me every day, is to think of myself in this work as a freedom worker. That is our call. When we know that the assaults on our freedom are in our faces and coming at us every day, it means stand in it. Stand in your purpose, drink some water, get some rest, have a health practice that allows you to breathe, and then get to work.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. Thank you all. So we have 15 minutes before Monique has to sweep out the door and get to Logan Airport and get down to Spelman. And I have a cluster of, there are 3 questions, and I've clustered a couple together to come up with one each. And I'm gonna direct them at specific folks, but feel free, I'm gonna say them all, and you can kind of entertain them. So the first cluster of questions is one that I think, Miguel, you probably are best equipped to answer, which is, what do you envision the importance of the U.S. Department of Education will look like in the next 4 years? And then what levers, these are sort of 2 questions mashed together, what levers of change are we not investing in enough that can transform systems of student outcomes?
there's going to be a lot of trickle-down BS, let's be honest. And what it's going to do is create coalitions that didn't exist before. We got too comfortable. And what levers need to be pulled? Honestly, we need to engage our students better across the country. We are failing at getting our students out there. Instead of, trickle down, top down, I think we need to think bottom up.
That's right.
We need to make sure that our students are paying attention to what's happening. Because that transcends politics. We want what's right. It's not a red or blue thing, it's an American thing.
Yeah.
And I think we need to go back to that. And as leaders in this room, we need to think about how we're talking in a way that we're not contributing to group polarization.
Yeah.
When I'm thinking about what's the next chapter for me, if I'm only sought out in blue states, I failed.
Yeah.
So we need to be paying attention to the darts, the damage. We need to protect our educators. They're under attack. We tried to provide them loan forgiveness, and now they're under attack. They know what's going on. So we need them to hear from us, you're going to be good. We're going to weather the storm. We did it 5 years ago. We're going to do it again. We need to engage our students better. We need to engage our students better. That's the lever, in my opinion, that if we can organize around giving our students voice, giving them agency, honestly, we're going to learn from them. Because my generation didn't get it right. I have complete confidence in the next generation. The degree to which we engage our students in this work will determine how successful we are.
That's right. Randy, there are a couple questions I thought would be good for you to address, and they orient around the idea that education's hard right now and that people are leaving the profession. And one person is more intimate about this and more personal and said, my daughter just finished freshman year of college and she's preparing for a career in elementary education. And when she hears education is hard right now, she responds with, that's why they need people like me. And so there's that. But then on the other hand, there's also the reality, and I see this every day with my students here at the Graduate School of Education. I mean, there are fewer and fewer conversations that I have with my students about going into the classroom to teach after they leave here. And that's just real. And part of that is that they came here from a very stressful set of experiences in the classroom, and they came here to rest, and they're burned out and understandable and not knowing what the future of public education is or any education is in this country, and they're looking at a really uncertain landscape. So how do you, on the one hand, keep teachers in the classroom and affirm and elevate the kind of energy that daughter is expressing, but then also get folks who, chose to be educators and chose to be teachers who have been burned out by this system at a time of real crisis? How do you keep folks in it?
Oh, I think the way you do it is, let me answer that question by kind of piggybacking on the question you asked Miguel.
Yeah.
Because most people who go into teaching or want to stay in teaching actually want to do a good job with their students. Mm-hmm. And they are sick and tired of the paperwork and sick and tired of the rules from on high, and they just actually want a little bit of autonomy within a classroom to actually meet the needs of young people. And that, what we've seen, and we haven't talked about it today yet, nor probably will we, is that the 25 years, there's like 3 different periods of time of education reform since Brown. First was the Johnson era of basically adding resources and doing it in a way that really focused on equity. And then it was teachers can't teach, so we are going to basically reduce them to algorithms and have no child left behind and then race to the top. And now it's like, okay, that didn't work, so we got the potpourri, essentially. And I think that Miguel is right. He was a service model to try to help, but we didn't get to what we should do instead. And I think so that is part of the dilemma here, because in classrooms, they feel, every teacher feels all of that. They feel the on high, they feel the AI, they feel the paperwork, they feel what the testing is, the NAEP scores, and then they're like, oh, our kids aren't coming to school because COVID broke us. And we can't engage for more than 2.5 nanoseconds. How are we, and then we're gonna get the yearly, first it was the mask, and then it was CRT, and then we're gonna get all of that. So what ends up happening is you've gotta have a really strong stomach to be a teacher right now to say, I'm putting that all away to actually try to teach. So if you stay 7 years and you've gotten mentoring and you have a community and there's a principal that really wants to help you and create agency, you have a school that actually kind of works, but it becomes an island and they try to disappear and not tell anybody what they're doing because they don't want somebody to change it. So that's why I go back to, let's not think about the teachers for a minute. Let's think about the students and what the students need. And the students need good teachers, and they need teachers, and they need to, I think, we need a safe and welcoming environment, sorry about my pen, a safe and welcoming environment that is engaging and relevant. And so what I've tried to start doing, and I'll stop here, is I've looked at, I'm in schools all the time, what has really engaged kids? And this is from the union that represents more higher ed folk than any other union in the country. Career tech ed has really engaged kids. Experiential learning, project-based learning. So I've been actually really trying to move like a dog on a bone on why don't we do more of that? Why don't we do more of that for boys, for girls? Why don't we do more of that? And yes, open up the aperture. Start it in high school. Like that's when we have kids, maybe junior high school, but why don't we do more of that? And don't think about that in the old way of vocational ed. Think about that when I see a kid like in Salem, where they come up to you and say, this is what I just did. This is my carpentry project. And look at the lines. I mean, the level of agency and confidence and critical thinking and problem solving and resilience and relationship building and communicating all in one. So that's why I've kind of been like, what do teachers want? They want more autonomy, they want kids to be engaged, they want it to be relevant, and they want schools to be safe and welcoming, and that's what I'm fighting for.
Thank you, thank you. And if you have not read Randy's recent New York Times piece, which was absolutely terrific, where you dug
Spell
into
it out,
and
yeah.
spelled that out, it really, really terrific, and it made me think really deeply about this. So thank you very much about it. Monique, I have a mashup of questions for you. One which comes with a name. Where's Justice? Where's Justice? There you are. There you are. There you are, brother. Justice, a distinguished recent graduate of Hugsy. Yes, yes, yes.
I love that name,
Dr.
Hugsy.
Lopez.
Justice, yes, exactly.
He's Dr. Lopez to me.
Dr. Lopez. Right. I love it. So Justice, a couple of questions had questions about how do we reach the most marginalized folks and center them and so forth. And your work has been, of course, devoted to that your whole career in life. But Justice has a wonderful question here. Two questions. I'm curious about ecosystems of love, healing, and wellness. What does it take to scale healing? And what does it take to scale love?
Oh, I love that question, and I'm going to try to do it in a few minutes.
Yes.
That is the open inquiry, actually. I think what we've been able to do is locate opportunities for practice in some of the existing modalities that we find in educational institutions and in some of the things that people currently use to respond to young people who are dysregulated or experiencing moments of crisis. Fundamentally, we have to understand and make sure that it's embedded in all of the professional development and or teacher preparation programs, a deep understanding that dysregulation happens when young people are dysregulated, right? Disruption happens when people are experiencing disruption, right? So when we see young people who are doing things and acting in ways, our immediate response can't be, get out, get hard, your problem, you go. But my invitation is always, that's when we actually bring them in closer. Using the restorative approaches has proven to be helpful. Engaging in practices that allow for school days to start with mindfulness breathing and other practices, opportunities to pair young people with adults on campus. What we know from the research for years is that when a young person has at least one adult on campus that is a safe person, that they're less likely to engage in disruptive behaviors, less likely to experience exclusionary disciplinary practices, all the things. And so when we know these things, scaling means that we build in every learning space opportunities for that to happen and opportunities for that to then be replicated. It's not like you come in and say the entire system has to go X, Y, and Z, because that's not going to work, because not everybody's equipped to handle that. Everybody can't facilitate a restorative circle, right? That's not a title for everybody. Everybody can't be the mentor or the safe person to the student who might be the hardest student in the school, right? Because there is no relationship. Sometimes kids may pick you to be their person and you don't want that person, right? or you want the person and they don't want you, right? So there's some mapping that has to occur to make sure that those relationships are genuine. But this is the kind of thing that is the invitation to go back to the old ways of building relationships. You scale love and healing when you scale relationships. Get in with young people, get in with the systems that create more opportunities for there to be young people. The schools that I have been evaluating to engage in these programs that have the most promising interventions that are perceived as the safest are those schools where they are doing all the things that Randy just said, in addition to having a structure and an infrastructure in place to have teachers not have to do so much paperwork, but to spend that time building relationships with the young people.
Exactly right.
So those are some of the things that allow for us to make a big difference. But also, partner, many of our civic institutions, organizations are underutilized as volunteers in our schools. I was a volunteer, have been a volunteer, will be a volunteer.
That's right.
And it's important to pull in people who do care and love our children to be a part of the community and tapestry of healing.
Yeah. That question reminds that question reminds me of a quote from my dear a quote from my dear former colleague here, Cornell West, who used to say that justice is what love looks like in public, right? And that Monique's response to your great questions reminded me of that. So Monique, who has just departed, Miguel and Randy, let me just say, and I said this to Monique last night, the three of you, the reason why I wanted to why I invited the three of you to be in conversation here is because the three of you, just like fun fact, are real inspirations to me. That you're three people who have done the work for so long, and for those of us who are trying to do the work for a long time and be what John Lewis said are long-distance freedom fighters. Right? You three are long-distance freedom fighters, and for those of us who are tired on the road right now, you are inspirations to keep going. And so it is such an honor to have you here, and at a time when this institution, this educational institution, is also under assault. I just want to say what a boon it is to have the three of you here on this stage and in this house and in this space, Patty, that your family has helped to create. And as long as the fight needs to happen, I can assure you one of the silver linings of this moment is that we've found a lot of fierce fighters here at Harvard, and we will continue to fight fiercely with you as long as we need to get to freedom. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Good job, Randy.